In today's video, I want to teach you the basic principles of how you need to think about your diet when creating your own fat loss, muscle building diet that you can follow. So I want you to learn the basics behind why I tell you to eat in a certain way. And if you just want to be told what to do, I have a video, I will link to it down below, this video here, where I actually give you the diet, like food by food, meal by meal. It's just a sample. Obviously, it's not a whole week-long thing, but you can get the basic sense of what to eat. And if you just want to be told, I've also got a free, you can just get that document for free. You just have to email me. That is in that video. But I also want to empower you to do this for yourself. And so I want you to understand the reasoning why behind what I recommend. And the first principle, number one, is that if you are going to overeat on calories, it is the fat calories that are the most easily stored as body fat. And I will let an expert explain it.
So when we look at isotopic labeling studies, if you overconsume protein, do those carbons, actually the carbons from that protein, do they wind up in adipose tissue? A very, 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 very small amount. Very small. If you overfeed protein and it puts you into a caloric surplus, you may store more of the dietary fat you eat in fat cells. And by the way, carbohydrates, very similar. You don't really store much of the carbohydrate you eat as fat. In isotopic labeling studies, they find that if you overfeed carbohydrate versus fat, you store about 2% or less of the fat in adipose comes from carbohydrate. Over about 98% comes from dietary fat. Why is that important? Well, if you overconsume protein, you now have a limited storage capacity for that protein. You have to oxidize that protein. If you're oxidizing more protein, you're oxidizing less fat. Same thing for carbohydrate. If you overconsume carbohydrate, you have to oxidize that carbohydrate once you've met your glycogen stores, and that leaves the fat you eat more available to be stored as fat. If you overconsume fat, it can just be stored because you don't really need much help storing extra dietary fat as fat.
So, as BioLane said, they've actually done the studies and it's proven that calories that come from fat that you eat are more easily stored as fat. Now, obviously, if you overeat any calories, you can store any of them as body fat. That is what body fat is. It's the extra storage of surplus energy. However, if you are going to overeat on something, the best idea is to overeat on protein because protein is thermic. There's a thermic effect.
So, in studies where they give high levels of protein, what happens? In the metabolic ward studies, people do tend to have a little bit better body composition outcomes on high protein diets versus low protein diets in terms of body fat because protein has a thermogenic effect and that equates to a little bit more energy expenditure per day. But you can still absolutely store body fat on a high protein diet. But in research studies where they tell people eat more protein, what happens? When we look at the studies of like super high levels of protein, like 3 and 4 grams per kilo, people don't really add body fat or they lose body fat. Why? One, we know protein helps build lean mass. We do have quite a bit of studies showing that higher protein diets are better than low or even some moderate protein diets at building lean tissue. And lean tissue is energetically expensive and you burn more calories per day. So that's one aspect of it. Also, the thermic effect of food, like we talked about. And most higher protein foods are high on the satiety index. So people may try to continue to overfeed, but it's very hard to overeat much on a really high protein diet. It's just not that palatable.
So when you eat protein, your body has to actually work quite hard and expend energy to break down the protein. So 20 to 30% of the calories in protein, almost kind of, not that they don't count, but your body actually uses them. So it's quite a costly form of energy. And also protein is probably the most under-eaten macronutrient. Now, the word macronutrient stands for the big nutrient, which is protein. You get protein, carbohydrates, fats, and then the fourth one they call alcohol. I would also say fiber is a macronutrient, but that comes bound in with carbohydrates and and with protein, because if you're looking at vegan and vegetarian sources of protein. But your macronutrients that you would be looking to combine in a diet would be your carbs, your proteins, and your fats. When you are building up a diet for yourself, you need to look firstly at your protein. That is your building block of your diet. That is the number one. And then your fats and your carbs are on a sliding scale, which you can play with. Personally, I would recommend going higher in carbs and lower in fat for the very reason that I've just mentioned. Your body will more easily store fat as fat. It has to oxidize the carbs. It's still got to work hard to oxidize and use up the protein. And your body needs the protein, the amino acids in the protein for so many bodily functions. Our bodies have and can make cholesterol, can make fat. The only essential fats are the EPA and the DHA, which come from fatty fish. So we do need some of those fats. I'm not saying cut out all fats. Don't do that either. I think it's good for your digestion. It's good also, it helps you absorb some of the vitamins and minerals in your food. So you do need fats. But as an energy source, your body needs glucose. It actually runs so much easier on glucose. Your brain requires glucose. And so I'm not saying that the ketogenic diet doesn't work. It can work for some people. It has its place. But personally, if you are not insulin resistant or diabetic or epileptic or have any kind of other condition where the ketogenic diet would work for you, I personally wouldn't do it. I have done it. I've tried it. And that's why I'm saying I wouldn't do it, because I just found no matter what I did, number one, I cramped and I cramped and I cramped, even though I upped my salt and I upped my electrolytes and I took magnesium and I took potassium, the cramping never resolved. And it just wasn't conducive to having energy. For me, I felt like sluggish. My muscles were sore. My legs were tight with the cramping, and it just never resolved itself. So for me, going higher in carbs, lower in fat is definitely the way to go. But when you are building up your diet, you have to think, number one, about your protein needs, and your protein has to come first. So you've got to think of protein at every meal, which I know might be difficult for some of you. Unfortunately, I'm not vegan or vegetarian. I used to be vegetarian, and it's really difficult, in my humble opinion, to get adequate protein on those diets, obviously more so on a vegan diet. I am not an expert in vegan diets. I don't know that many protein sources for vegans. And what I would be very wary of as a vegan is, are you getting all the essential amino acids that you need? Because vegan or plant sources of protein often just have some of the amino acids and they're not a complete source. So I would be wary of that. But obviously, if you're vegan, you will know better what protein sources are good for you. If you're a vegetarian, it is a bit easier if you eat eggs and you have dairy and cheese and things like that. So there you can get some animal proteins in. And the reason I do strongly believe, this is just, again, what I think, you take it or leave it. If you don't like what I'm saying, click off. I strongly believe that animal sources of protein are the way to go, because they do contain the complete amount of amino acids that we need, and they are actually rich in nutrients that we need, and they contain the form of iron that is most readily absorbed and available that the body needs, the heme iron. And so I just think, for me personally, I always would choose proper protein sources from animals, and it's got the highest protein to calorie ratio that you can think of. You know, animal sources of protein, lean meats, eggs, fat-free dairy or low-fat dairy, those things have high protein and are low on the calorie scale. So you're getting bang for your buck. So you're not going to go over your calorie budget while still being able to get in your protein needs for the day. Now, how do you work out how much protein you need? Obviously, again, the experts are varied in what they say. From everything I've listened to, read, studied, what I've come to decide for myself would be adequate and maybe a little bit surplus would be 1 gram of protein per pound of lean or ideal body weight. So that's how I work it out, which means for me, at my sort of lean weight, I'm about 51 kgs, somewhere there. So I just rounded off to 50 kgs, which might be a little bit too lean for me. So let's just say 51, 52, but round number, 50 kilograms. Convert that to pounds. Okay, it's a bit more than 100 pounds, but roughly my lean body weight would be just over 100 pounds. 1 gram, 100 pounds. I just work it out as a rough estimate of 100 grams of protein per day that I need. You would then calculate your protein needs based on your ideal body weight. If you're a female who should weigh around 60 kgs, so if you are currently 80 kilograms or let's say 170 pounds, and your ideal body weight is lower than that. Maybe it's 60 kilograms, or it is, what would that be in pounds? 130 something pounds. You would then calculate your protein needs based on that. It's very easy. Like if you say 1 gram of protein per 1 pound of ideal body weight, then you just say, if I should be around 130 pounds, I need roughly 130 grams of protein. And then you divide that up into a number of meals. So let's say you're going to do 3 meals. We'll leave the snacks out of it. Don't try and get your protein in your snacks just for now. And then you're going to say, I need, Yogi. And then you're going to say, I need about, let's say you want to hit a protein goal of 120. So 120 grams of protein, you can divide that by 3 meals, and that'll be 40, 40, 40. So ideally, you as a female who should weigh 120, you are going to want to try and aim to get 40 grams of protein per meal. Now, that doesn't mean 40 grams of steak. That means your steak will contain 40 grams of protein, and that would equate to, I'd have to look it up now. I'll put it on the screen here. 100 and something grams of steak would contain 40 grams of protein. I'll put a few options here on the screen. What foods and how much you would need to eat of those foods to give you 40 grams of protein at each meal. So you can see that probably most of us are actually under-eating protein. Now, it's not to say that if you're under-eating protein, you're malnourished, you're under-eating completely, but the reason I say we should hit our protein goals is because if you don't, and your body does need amino acids, the theory that I've heard that makes sense is your body then breaks down your own muscle to get those amino acids because there's no way it can get them from. I've heard this said by dietitians and by some experts. It makes sense. It's a theory that gels with me. And if you're trying to build lean muscle, which I would encourage all of you to do because lean muscle is metabolically active, it is the place where we can store excess glucose. I mean, our muscles hold glycogen. So you do want to keep your muscles full and round and active and try and grow some more muscle tissue. Then you do want to have adequate or even a little bit of surplus protein because, as BioLane also says, Dr. Lane Norton, he says, in studies where people do overeat protein, what happens? Nothing much. They actually don't really gain weight. So again, this is the macronutrient that if you want to overeat on something, overeat on lean protein. Right now, I'm going to put on the screen some beautiful sources of lean protein. Just bear in mind that salmon, it's a fantastic protein source. It's full of omega-3s, but it is fatty. So the protein in salmon comes packaged with a fair amount of fat. It's not highly fatty like a sausage, like you get these very fatty sausages like salamis, like things like that. It's only got about 7 grams of fat per 100 grams, but it does add up. So salmon is a fatty fish, and some of the fish are quite fatty. So bear in mind, if you're going to choose a lot of fish, you want to choose leaner fishes if you can. And then obviously wild game is a fantastic lean source of protein. And don't forget, the other reason we are choosing lean cuts of meat is because you still have to cook them. And you're going to have to use some form of oil or something to make it not stick to the pan. And olive oil, like a little tablespoon here or there, it also adds up. Again, it's not that I'm fat phobic. It's that if you're trying to lose weight, specifically if you're trying to lose fat, you want to keep your protein up and high. You want to keep your fat low, and you want to stick to a calorie budget. So that is a task that takes some planning. It takes some meal prepping. It takes some thought process. So I highly recommend what all of you do if you want to lose fat loss, weight loss, fat loss, but most of us want to lose fat and not muscle as well. You must work out your daily calorie budget that is for you in a fat loss phase. So you can do that. There are many free online calorie counters or calorie calculators, should I say. Gym Geek is a good one. All of these online food trackers that you get, MyFitnessPal does it, Fat Secret does it. There are so many. Just put them in, Google search, you put in your weight, your height, your age, your activity level. It asks you, put in whether you're male or female, it asks you quite a number of questions. And then based on your answers, it'll spit out your calorie budget that you should be sticking to for fat loss. Okay, call it weight loss, but we are wanting to lose fat. And then let's say for me, it averages 1,600 calories. So for me to get 100 grams of protein in a day with a calorie budget of 1,600, I'm going to decide, okay, I'm going to eat this, this, and this. And then whatever calories are left after I've met my protein goals, this is how you build it in your mind. Protein first, then you say, okay, now I need carbs for energy. You have your fistful or whatever it is of carbs with each meal. And then use your fats for just food preparation and cooking. And I know fat provides flavor. So most restaurant food, and it provides mouthfeel and texture, most restaurant foods have a lot of fat in them, oils and butters and creams and sauces, because it's delicious. It's mouthfeel, it's texture, it's flavor. Fat gives flavor as well. And unfortunately, we have to cut that out if we are trying to lose weight. Not that you can never have a meal with cream or, lathered in oils or dressings anymore. You would have to do that in a limited, like maybe once a week amount. And then ideally, you track that as well. And that becomes a day where you've had a bit more fat for the day, and you would cut back on your carbs if you want to stick to a calorie budget for that day as well. If you want a day where you just say stuff it, that's also fine. But remember, if your goal is fat loss itself, you do need to stick consistently to a calorie budget for a long enough period of time. And you don't want to keep breaking that by having a high calorie day too often, because then your body on that day might store a bit, and now you've got to work double hard to lose the weight. Again, you've got to listen to your hunger as well. If your calorie deficit is way too big and you are starving, you've got to eat a bit more. Okay, eat within your deficit, but eat a bit more so that you're not constantly hungry, so that cravings are not always knocking at the back of your mind either. If you suffer with cravings, you're going to have to include the foods that you love, maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. And again, either you track it on that day or you have a no tracking day. And you don't have to track. You can also eyeball your food. But in order to get good enough to eyeball your food, you do need to track for a period of time. And I can feel the resistance. This is where people say, I don't want to do it. But if you are serious about fat loss, you need to weigh, measure, and track. You just have to do it. You do it for a period of time. And the reason is because, when we were hunter-gatherers without grocery shops, with all these fancy foods nowadays, prepackaged foods that are so delicious, I mean, Mother Nature took care of all of this for us. What was available? Lean meats, vegetables, nuts and berries, some fruits. That was it. And there was feast and there was famine. So we had times where we were very lean and we didn't have cookies and brownies and ice cream and chocolates and sauces and dips and whips and canned food that you could just spray into your mouth. We didn't have any of this. And so we didn't need to track and weigh and measure. But now our foods, for the majority of us, are so far removed from what is natural and wholesome that you've got to bring yourself back to some kind of tracking. And of course, only if this applies to you, if you actually need and want to lose weight. If you don't and you're happy where you're at, you don't have to do any of this. No one has to do anything. But this video is for the ladies who really want to lose weight. And for those of you who are new here, my name is Louise and I am an ex-bikini competitor. What that means is that I've taken part in the bikini division of bodybuilding shows. So that's what a bikini competitor does. I did that years ago. I no longer do that. But I gained so much knowledge from the way that the coaches told us to diet. And now, looking back, I understand the principles behind that way of dieting, which is that you pretty much eat very low fat. You try not to include excess fats in your meals. Your meals are spaced out. They all have protein in them. Even the snacks when you are competing are more high protein snacks. But for the average lady who wants to lose weight, what you need to think of is, if I'm having 3 meals a day, each meal must have enough protein. You can have less at one meal, more at another meal, less at another. But if you're trying to just get all your protein in one meal, not that you can't absorb it all, but do you really want to chance your system not absorbing all that protein in one sitting? I personally, look, I don't know what the actual fact is. I mean, in nature, sometimes you would just eat one meal a day. I'm sure your body can adapt. So if you want to do intermittent fasting and just have one big meal, I think the body is capable of adapting and pulling what it needs from that one big meal. However, personally, I say for success, for weight loss success, for stable energy throughout the day, do 3 meals a day with 2 very, very small, moderate snacks. And the snacks can be like a piece of fruit, a little handful of nuts, a cup of coffee, not too much milk, like not a frappuccino type of coffee. I'm talking about just like an actual coffee, a cup of tea. So not really to fill you up, just to tide you over to your next meal. Make sure that your meals are adequate. 3 adequate meals within your calorie budget. So for me, what that might look like is a breakfast of around 400 calories, a lunch of around the same. Maybe my supper's a little bit bigger, 500 to 600 calories, and then there are a few hundred calories for snacks and teas and coffees. I personally really like about 60 mils of milk in a big cup of coffee. It's just a thing I like. I don't like coffee that's too watery. And so I build into my daily sort of calorie count. When I am tracking, I build enough of that in. So I will track 60 mils of milk per cup of coffee. And the milk does have a bit of fat and it's got a little bit of protein and a few carbs. And so that does make up as well my daily macros. Ideally, when you look at, let's say on Fat Secret, you can get your macro breakdown. I'll put that on the screen here too. Ideally, you want it to be pretty even, like about 33% protein, 33% carbs, 33% fat. But what that means in terms of grams, because fat is so high in calories, is that your fat grams will be around 30 to 50 grams per day, somewhere there. Your carbs could be in the range of 100, 120, could be 80 grams of carbs for the day. And your protein, for me, should be about 100. It could go slightly over. If it goes slightly under in a day, don't panic. But you need to build your meal. A lean protein source, a pretty clean carb source. Now, when I say the word clean, I mean it's just a carb. It's not a carb bound in with a fat, like a brownie or a cake. In fact, brownies, cakes, baked goods, cream donuts, all these things, crisps, chips, they're actually fat sources. They have carbs in them, of course. They've got the sugars or the potato chips, but they're fat. And the reason I say that is because if you look at their nutritional breakdown, the biggest amount of calories in those types of foods are coming from fats. The same thing with Viennas and sausages and like salamis, bacon, streaky bacon particularly. Yes, they have protein in them, but you can't choose those as a protein source because they are majority fat. Majority of the calories in that food comes from fat. And when you have a calorie budget to spend, you don't want to waste it, quote unquote, on like all the fat that comes with the bacon, because then how are you going to meet your protein needs? So that is why you are choosing lower fat foods. That is why you are choosing the cleaner carbs, because you want to track and measure your carb as a carb, your protein as a protein. You know, in that meal, I'm getting 30 grams of protein, 40 grams of protein. I'm going to get 40 grams of carbs in the sweet potato. And then I am in control. I'm going to either have some nuts for my fat, a bit of avo, a bit of olive oil. Again, it's the fats that you want and that you need, not the fats that you don't want. And this is how you think about your diet for fat loss. The last very important thing I want to touch on is what I said was the fourth macronutrient, which is fiber. I know they say alcohol is, but fiber is also very important. So many studies have shown that people who have high fiber in their diets do lose weight or are at a lower weight. And also fiber keeps you fuller for longer, and some of it you poop out, bonus, yay. And also there are so many other health benefits to fiber. So at every meal, try and include fiber-rich foods. So you could include that in your carb source. Obviously, your protein sources, unless you're vegan or vegetarian, do not include fiber. I mean, lean meats, lean dairy, eggs, they don't include fiber. Fish, there's no fiber there. So if you're having oats, fantastic, great source of fiber. If you're having all bran flakes, great source of fiber. If you are having barley, quinoa, brown rice, brown bread, sweet potato, and then of course, vegetables. Now, vegetables, for the most part, for the majority, are like a free food because they are so low in calories. So much of the calories are fibrous. There's so much micronutrients in vegetables, but some vegetables are fairly starchy, which means they are actually quite carby. They're actually a good source of carbohydrates, like your butternut, sweet potato, your pumpkin, even carrots are quite carb dense. And so you've got to be not careful, but with those kinds of vegetables, count them more as a carb as well. Those are not a free food. But in general, cucumber, tomato, lettuce, spinach, green beans, broccoli, cauliflower, mushrooms, zucchini, all these things you can just eat to satiety. You really don't have to track them in your food tracking app, yes, but don't really worry about them. just dish them up, pile them on. Peas, yeah, they're fairly starchy, but they're not like having a bowl of sugar. So again, be sensible and then build your meal with all of these ingredients. So again, like I say, go back to basics. I would choose a protein source. I would choose a carb. I would add in some vegetables, make sure I've got some fiber there. And then the fat, you've used it to cook with, or the fat has come in the form of the yolk of the egg, in the form of the salmon, the fish fat, in the form of maybe you've quickly grilled your steak, but you had to baste it with a bit of olive oil. That is where you're getting your fat. And so that is the building blocks to me in my mind of how I would build a fat loss diet. Protein first, fiber second. Remember always to stick to your calorie budget. Keep it lower in fat. Keep the carbs steady and enough so that you have energy. And you should hit your fat loss goals pretty easily. I will see you in the next video. Bye.